Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Natalie Nish, and I am an arts educator for elementary school, first grade through sixth grade. And I'm going to be teaching you how to do a three-dimensional donut, which is one of my students' favorite of all time kind of three-dimensional projects. So I'm going to go over the list of supplies that you'll need. Table coverings, because it gets kind of messy because we're going to be using some plaster strips and some paint. Some newsprint. We just have regular newsprint that you can use like this, or regular newspaper is what I use in my classroom. Masking tape, paper plate. I like to use the foam because it's going to get pretty wet, and if you use a paper plate, it tends to get too soggy and get ruined. A Sharpie, because we're going to be writing our names on here. Scissors to cut our plaster cloth, and we'll talk about plaster cloth in a minute. Paint to do our paint donut color, a brush to put it on. Glue, Elmer's glue is what I like to use with some shaving cream. Make sure the shaving cream is like your white foam and not, I've used blue foam before and it changes the color of your frosting. You can use regular food coloring or watercolor, liquid watercolors to tint your frosting, and then regular sprinkles. So let's get started and we'll show you how to create this. All right, so with our newsprint, when students start to create this, I'm going to turn the newsprint to the corner and start rolling on the sides. Now, one of the problems that the students like to do is they like to fold it and do it flat, and their donuts will end up being skinny and not have much dimension to it and look kind of funny. So I teach them to just crumple it, and as they're folding it, to crumple it and not do it too tiny, because if it's too tiny, then it's going to be a skinny donut. So just kind of crumple as we're going. Okay, now when we make this donut, I like to make it so that it's a realistic size. And so in order to get the realistic size, I have the students grab the corner and then start to wrap that newsprint around their hand. And that will help them get that size dimension so that it's not too big. Okay, once you get it to here, just keep kind of forming it, crunching it, getting it to the size that you want it to be. And then we're going to use some masking tape. So sometimes I'll have strips that are pre-cut and put it like on the side where the students will be and have them so that they're already pre-ready to go. It's up to you. Sometimes I give them a full roll of masking tape. It's just kind of what's convenient for you, what's convenient for the students. Okay, so I'm going to rewrap this. And again, I like to kind of just crunch it so it's not flat and it's more rounded. And then all I need to do is make sure that all the pieces are taped down, that we don't have a whole lot of pieces and edges sticking out. So I don't have to really use a lot of tape. It's just enough to hold those edges down. Okay, next I have, again, the foam plate. And in the center is where all the mess is going to be and where your donut's going to be. So I will have the students write their name and then their teacher's name also, because when I do this project, I have, like, for example, second grade. And when they have all their donuts sitting on their plates, they all look the same, and it's hard to tell them apart. So when they're on there, then we can identify whose is whose. So we just put it here and have that be ready. Okay, next I'm going to be prepping my plaster strips. Now this is called plaster cloth, and the plaster cloth will come in usually a roll. And so we have pre-cut the plaster cloth so that it's a 4 foot and the width is 4 inches. So I have the students just fold it in half, and then they're going to take their scissors and they're going to start to cut the strips. Now, the reason why we do strips is because it's a lot easier to work with smaller pieces to be able to get down inside where it's tight, and then it will lay more smoothly to get the size and the dimensions that you need to make the look more realistic. So each student I provide scissors to. They each have their own strip, and they'll cut their own strips. If you try to lay too much and you fold it too many times, then it's too thick, and the students struggle with cutting their plaster cloth. This is where it'll tend to get a little bit dusty because of the plaster that's on here. So this is where we're going to start to get messy and have fun. And then the last part, I'm just unfolding that last fold and cutting a couple of strips. Okay, let's adjust here. Okay, another thing with my students, when I have their water that's close to their working station, I try to provide that the strips are farthest away, because when we start to dip into the water, you start to create a mess. And if they were to drip and these were on the other side and drip into the pile, it activates the plaster and the plaster goes hard, and then they can't use those strips. So we try to avoid that happening. Okay, so next with the plaster strips, we have to activate the plaster. So we dip it into the water, and when you do this, I like to shake the excess off and then try to keep it as flat as I can. And then when I start to do the donut, I'll put it so that it goes on the inside first and lay it over the top. Once I've done about 2 or 3 strips, I then want to start to smooth out where you can see all the little holes are. So here's 2 strips, and I'm going to start to rub, and it activates that plaster and makes it so that it fills in all the cloth, and the texture is more smooth like the donut texture would be, and it doesn't look holey. And again, as you're starting to lay that down, if you've got some bumps and some lumps, then go ahead and just press it, because right now it's still pliable and it hasn't hardened up yet. As you're working, these plaster strips are going to start to harden, and it's kind of similar to when you have, if anybody's broken their arm or something and had to get a cast, and it gets hard just like those casts.
Maybe talk about overlapping.
Okay, when I do these strips, if you notice, I'm going to be overlapping so that we get full coverage. We want to make sure we're covering all of the newsprint, newspaper, and all of any tape. So you want to make sure there's no little gaps in between. So overlap those plaster strips so you can have full coverage. And this part is so fun for the students because they get to be messy, it's wet, and when they start rubbing, it's just kind of mesmerizing. I've had one student that she just rubbed it for like 10 minutes and massaged it and got it just the perfect shape she wanted it to be. I told her and I whispered in her ear and I says, "You really like this, right?" And she says, "Yes." So I says, "You're going to love sculpture. So when you get into high school, sign up for those sculpture classes." Okay, when you're doing the plaster strips, you can see I'm covering just the top right now. In a minute, I'm going to be turning it over and doing it on the underside also. Again, we want to make sure we have full coverage so that we're covering all the newsprint and all the tape. So we no longer can see any of that, and all we're seeing is plaster strips. Okay, now I'm starting to flip it over to the underside and covering all the newsprint on this side. Again, I'm overlapping, still putting it in the center so that I go on the first strips that was on the other side, overlapping to the other side, covering the whole entire bottom. Again, if you have bumps and lumps that don't look natural, this is the time to squish it and form it so that you have your desired look. Because once it dries, it is going to be that shape. This step is probably the step that takes the longest of all the steps making this donut. But it's so fun, so mesmerizing, soothing. Make sure you're having fun while you're doing it. Okay, I'm getting towards the end, so now I'm just going to be double checking, making sure that I've covered all tape and all newsprint, and smoothing out all the holes so that you have your smooth donut. Okay, looks like I'm about there. I have one more spot. Okay, now I'm just checking everything, make sure I don't have like strings that are sticking up, any bumps that I don't want, because again, this is still why it's still pliable, and you want your donut shape probably not as bumpy and lumpy as some of my students get theirs to be like. Okay, and then because you have water on the plate, I'll just have the students dump their extra water so that it's not as wet. And then I'll have them just kind of rinse their fingers off just a little bit into their bucket of water. Okay. Okay, now we have extra strips, so I'll just have the students set those to the side, use them for another project. All right, now, next comes our paint. This is a tempera paint. It's kind of a fleshy tone. We want it to look like it's our donut color. So this is the donut before it has any frosting on it. Now, as we're covering the donut, you want to make sure that it's not too thick or too runny. So you want a good coverage, and a lot of times you'll have those holes that you may not have smoothed out enough. So I'll teach the kids to take their brush and kind of push it into the holes so that that way they get full coverage and you don't have white little dots all over. So I mentioned that sometimes we use the extra plaster cloth to do other projects. Some other fun projects that I've taught that the kids absolutely love is making pizza slices. And I integrate that with their math with third grade because they're learning about fractions. And you divide your pizza into the pizza slices, fractions, and they create each a pizza slice, and we put it together when we're finished as a whole pizza, and they get to have fun with fractions. But they got to make their own individual pizza slices. Another thing I do is also with fifth grade, they are learning about math nets. And so once they have created a math net, we'll turn that math net into a form that creates a slice of cake. So I'll show you these other projects a little bit later so that you can see the finished product and how much fun the kids love doing it. Another project I've used plaster strips with is sixth grade. They learn about the ancient world and about Egypt, and so we like to create the Egyptian masks. And the kids absolutely love creating those masks. It looks so realistic, and plaster strips are students' favorites. Okay, right now I'm just checking and making sure it's not runny. I've covered every white spot. And I've got full coverage of my donut. Okay, so make sure the students just rinse their brushes out. Take care of the equipment always. And then, of course, wash our hands again. Okay, I hope everybody's having fun so far. All right, next step is we're going to be creating the fun, yummy, delicious looking frosting. All right, so you're going to need a bowl and a spoon. We're going to need the shaving cream. Make sure you shake it up before we use it. If you use old shaving cream, I've noticed that the frosting tends to get runny, and so it looks like your frosting melted. And so if you can, try to get fresh shaving cream. Okay, and then the mixture that I like to do about 3/4 shaving cream to 1/4 of glue. I've tried doing it so that it's half and half, and it kind of makes your frosting a little bit more runny that way too. So again, just about 1/4 of the glue to 3/4. And I usually don't measure it, I just look at it and do it by eyeball. Okay. All right, next we have liquid food coloring, and I'm just using a dropper to put in my colors. Blue is one of the favorites, but I've done pink frosting and purple frosting and green frosting and just any color frosting the kids really want. Okay. And then I will start to mix the color up. You want to do as less mixing as possible, just enough to get the glue mixed in with the shaving cream so that there's a good consistency and your color's been mixed up. The more you mix it, the more it's going to make it go flat. Okay, and then each student I provide a spoon for so that they can each have their own spoon. The part that they get the craziest at is the sprinkles, of course. Students absolutely love sprinkles and they want to eat them. So I try to tell them, nope, this is an art project. We don't eat any of the supplies. So I just have to watch them close because they still try. All right, so we scoop it up. When you scoop it, it's just like dumping it on. You don't want to spread a whole lot because if you spread too much, then it, again, makes it go flat. You want it to look more natural. So everywhere that there would be frosting, some students will want to try to paint all the way down the sides, in the center. Whatever looks yummy to them, I guess. So put on what looks good to you. I like to turn my project around so I can see it at all angles, so I can make sure all my frosting's covered. Okay, next comes the fun sprinkles. This is the part where I tell the students less is more, because they want to just put handfuls and handfuls onto their donuts. So I teach them just to grab a little pinch at a time and sprinkle a few, and not make, you want to still see the frosting, not just sprinkles. So once you have the sprinkles on, okay, and here is our finished product. Thanks for joining me. This was really fun to show you how to make our three-dimensional donuts. Next, I want to show you some of those projects that I was talking about. Here is the Egyptian masks that the sixth graders learn about. So again, this was plaster, and they put it onto a face form, and then they were learning about the different crowns that was for the royalty. And so we integrated this part so that they could create their Egyptian masks. So we'll lay that right there. Here are some of the cakes that I was talking about. I let the kids choose what flavor of cake that they wanted, and then also what flavor of frosting they wanted. So of course, lemon cake, chocolate cake was a favorite, strawberry cake, whatever they wanted would mix up. And again, this is where the math net, they had to create that first and then create the form. We put the plaster strips on top of it, and then to make it look more like it had layers of cake, we would paint the frosting just on the outside there. The only drawback with this frosting and real cake with their frosting is you can't build it up like regular cake is, because this is the perfect example of what happens. It just bubbles up and flows down to the other edge, which is okay, but it's not as pretty as regular cake frosting, but we do what we can with our supplies. All right, one of the last things was pizza slices. So this is the one where the students would work with fractions. And so here are different varieties of different slices of pizza. So again, you're just working with cardboard and the newsprint for the crust and taping it down, putting the plaster cloth over it. And then I just used the foam paper cut up, and we talked about all the different kinds of toppings and what colors those toppings would be. And then we could put all of our pizza slices together once they're made and play with them and do the fractions. So those are some more projects that what I teach doing with three-dimensional forms and our plaster cloth. Thank you.